Welcome back to the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast, where we explore elements of today's fire service. This podcast is for Metro Chiefs by Metro Chiefs, engaging in conversations about the challenges and opportunities that matter most to the leaders in our association. While this series is created with Metro members in mind, the topics we explore are also relevant to current or aspiring chief officers in departments of any size across the U.S. and even around the world. I'm your host, Alec Otten, a member of the Metro Chiefs and the fire chief for Aurora Fire Rescue in Colorado. Today's episode is a part 3 of our mini-series on wellness in the fire service, and it's brought to you by our presenting sponsor, LifeScan Wellness, a national leader in comprehensive early detection physicals and wellness programs for first responders. Their partnership allows us to spotlight some of the most pressing health and wellness issues facing fire service professionals today. On a personal note, I've been in this profession long enough to have lost people in my department and in my fire service family, not on the fire ground, but to the long-term impacts of the job. And those losses hit obviously a lot differently depending on the circumstance, but they hit hard because many of these losses are preventable. And they're not dramatic, they're not like cinematic, they don't make headlines, but they have a really significant impact on families, on crews, on the organization, and in ways that just never go away. They stick with you forever. And if we're really being honest with ourselves as leaders, we know that this is an area where we still have quite a bit of work to do. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. Before we meet our amazing guest, it's my privilege to introduce the CEO of LifeScan Wellness and a longtime advocate for firefighter health and safety, and that is my good friend, Chief Todd LeDuc, to share a welcome from LifeScan and his why for this particular conversation.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate the opportunity just to say a few words, having myself retired as chief of a metro department. I know, as do you and do our colleagues, and you said it beautifully, we still have a lot of work to do on the front of addressing preventable risk. And you're absolutely right. Sudden cardiac deaths and disability from sudden cardiac events continue to be the leading cause of on-duty firefighter health risk. So, and I couldn't ask for any better guest than my dear friend, Dr. Stefanos Kales, who's led the way on this for many years. So at LifeScan, on behalf of all of the men and women clinicians that we deploy nationwide, and their sole focus is on the health, wellness, and safety of first responders, I'm proud for us to be able to continue our partnership longstanding with the Metro section. And I think you're going to find today very insightful, and we're proud to be a small part of bringing it to you. So thank you again. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Todd. As always, we certainly appreciate your leadership and your commitment to making the industry better when it comes to firefighter wellness. And I appreciate you bringing this to the forefront and making it a priority for the Metro Chiefs. And so we'll move on and we'll meet our guest for the conversation today. And as always, I'm joined by someone way smarter than me who brings tremendous experience and research. And I know, Dr. Kales, you're going to shake your head and be humble, and I appreciate that. I think that's wonderful. But you bring a lot to this issue, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it. Dr. Stefanos Kales is a professor at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and has spent decades, so you started when you were 3, I'm sure, researching cardiovascular risk, metabolic health, and line-of-duty deaths in firefighters. And his work has significantly shaped how we understand the relationship between the demands of the job and long-term health outcomes. I joked with Dr. Kales when we started this conversation that I try to do a little research on him, and I broke the internet, because there's a lot out there about you, and over 250 publications, and those things have been cited tens of thousands of times. And so I know you're super busy, And I just want to express our gratitude from the Metro Chiefs Leadership Development Group, our appreciation for you joining us today. And I'm sure I missed something in your introduction that's probably relevant to what we're talking about today. And so is there anything else that I missed that our listeners should know?
Well, first, just let me thank you for the opportunity. And, it's always great to see my old friend Todd, and the IFC in general have been great friends and supporters, and of various research projects and conferences and things that we've done. So it's important for me to make time to give back and talk to your members and see how we can help. And so it's really a great opportunity for me. And I mean, your intro was more than kind enough. I just say that while I've been doing research in this area for over 30 years, I'm trained in internal medicine, and I'm still a card-carrying occupational medicine doctor. And that's kind of in my when I was finishing my occupational medicine training, that's how I actually got into this. Some hazmat firefighter teams came to us, the clinic where I was working, to my boss and said, can you help us design the OSHA surveillance exams that we need to go through? And it became a calling, if you will, and really, a labor of love, working with the fire service. And but I bring both a clinical and a research perspective to it. So, and I'm very interested in, prevention. Although we've spent a lot of time, probably too much looking at autopsies and why people die and how they died. I mean, what we're really ultimately trying to do is to get to the preventive side. And I want to, just advocate as you and Todd would, that wellness and trying to lead a healthy, no one is going to be perfect and nothing cures everything, but there's a lot to be said about making small changes in one's habits and trying to, get on the preventive side of things, So.
Well, that really closely aligns with what we're trying to do in the fire services in our communities. We talk about community risk reduction, and if it's prevented, you save lives and property, right? And I think it's a perfect alignment, and has a lot of synergy with the fire service today. So thank you for clarifying that. A pracademic of sorts, right? Then you come from a clinical background, and you're incorporating research into that.
I think you invented that word, Chief, but it sounds good. It sounds good. I'll take it.
I invent a lot of words. It's just part of my fire chief vocabulary. We talked a little bit about that too, but we won't share any of those words without having to bleep them out. So we'll get started in the conversation, and as we've done in the past with these, we'll start at a higher level. In a lot of ways, we got to hear Todd's why, but I love the why behind research and behind the solutions. And so I think it's important to ask you, why are we talking about this in the fire service today? Why should we be talking about this issue?
Sure. Well, I think firefighters, I don't have to tell all of you, you do a very tough job and you provide a great service to the public. But there are inherent risks, and beyond the sort of acute risks of vehicular accidents and building collapses and smoke inhalation and burns, we have kind of a smoldering epidemic of chronic disease. So you have heart disease, which is of course as Chief Todd said, the leading cause of on-duty death. You have cancers, which are shown to be increased in firefighters compared to the general population, and firefighting as an occupation, right, accepted by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a cancer risk factor. And there's also a slew of behavioral health issues that go along, right? Depression, post-traumatic stress, sometimes overlapping with substance abuse. And so there's a lot of concerns for firefighters' health and working to try to improve them. And I think that's why we're having the conversation. I mean, you as all of you as chiefs, you're concerned with your personnel. I would say to a greater extent than you are for the the apparatus and the vehicles and things like that. I mean, those are important, and many people have said in the fire service that we spend more time shining up the vehicles than taking care of our own bodies. But I mean, I really do think that I would say the IAFC, but also the IFF. I mean, both organizations have really done a lot to make progress in this area. But as Chief Todd said, there's still a lot of work to be done. So,
can you do a little bit of a deeper dive into the current landscape, specifically related to cardiac health? Because both of you had mentioned that is the leading cause of death, and I think there's always a misperception about like how big of an impact cardiac health or a lack of cardiac health really has on our membership, even sudden cardiac death, because I think it's probably underreported in a lot of ways, right? Because if you have a heart attack 48 hours outside of the window, it's not being, out of your work window, it's not being reported as a line of duty death, likely. And so we probably fail to capture some of that. But what does that landscape look like? What is the percentage of people, generally that are suffering from a poor cardiac health? And in your decades of research, how have you seen that change over the last few decades, if at all?
Yeah. So, all good questions. Just because I'll forget about it if we don't address it now. So I do know that the NFPA and USFA are including events now that occur within 24 hours of duty. So that kind of changes some of the numbers. And there's been a discussion about that, for a long time, that because a lot of the excitement and effort that goes around certain emergency duties, the metabolic and physiologic effects of that, the adrenaline surge, but other things as well, it carries over for a while. So it can take hours, to completely sort of go back to normal. But getting back to the big picture, obviously you have to look at two sort of different phenomena. One is lifetime mortality. So in that sense, firefighters are not that different than the general population. And, cardiovascular deaths are the leading cause, roughly about a third of deaths, followed by cancers, at like 25 to 30%, and then other chronic diseases as major causes, and then traumatic things and early deaths as sort of smaller groupings there. In terms of the on-duty deaths, right? Firefighters are really, really unique. Even comparing them to a group like law enforcement officers who are very similar in other ways, the percentage of on-duty deaths among law enforcement officers that are attributable to sudden cardiac death is somewhere between 7 and 10%, whereas in firefighters, cardiovascular deaths are 45 to 50%, and with sudden cardiac deaths being about 45%. And now, how has that changed? So that's very there aren't national statistics for like all occupations. The Bureau of Labor Statistics does keep some statistics, but they don't look at illnesses. So even though we know that the sudden cardiac deaths would be a smaller number, maybe even less than what it is in the police community. You do have, depending upon the occupation, you can have sort of things that are outliers, right? Like if you work in a convenience store, on-duty deaths could most likely be violent, due to armed robberies, or if you're in a transportation industry, it could be heavily weighted towards vehicular accidents and things of that sort. So, I mean, fire service, you have all these hazards like, burns, smoke inhalation, building collapses. You do have motor vehicle accidents being a significant component, and even violent assaults. Unfortunately, they do take place. But it's really unique where almost half of the deaths are related to the heart, and most of those are what we call sudden cardiac death, which is generally defined as you have symptoms or lack thereof, and the person is dead within 24 hours of the initial, prodrome or symptoms or something like that. So how has it changed over the years? The number of on-duty deaths, like the people have been following this at least since the 1970s. So the overall deaths, maybe they were back in the late 70s, 150 per year, and then they were sort of, at 100, and now they've kind of come down to below 100. But the proportion or the percentage of those deaths that are cardiac has remained remarkably stable. So, you can't really say that the problem is worse. And on the one hand, you could say it's better because the absolute number has gone down. But as a proportion, it's been stable and stubborn. And you would like to think, because some of those other things are accidental and they're, less controllable, whereas heart, we have preventive strategies and we have medical treatments for risk factors as well as heart problems. We have, procedures, and there's been, tremendous advances in all of that. You would like to think that the proportion that's cardiac would have gone down, but it has not. So
yeah, and it's fascinating, because even like as you were talking through that, I'm thinking about from a firefighting standpoint, the things that have changed in our environment, the type of materials that are burning in households, right, and the now less natural fibers and natural products and more petroleum-based or plastics and all of the things that come off of those. There's so many variables, right? So it's hard to say, well, what's gotten better and what's gotten worse, and has the increase in some of these products of combustion been offset by our better, more advanced cardiac care and awareness anyway, interventions like statins or whatever, that has kind of kept it neutral despite that. But I guess there's so many variables, it's really hard to say. But
there are a lot. If you allow me, first let me just. This is a weird looking can, but it's actually sparkling water. So I don't want the audience to think I'm drinking a sugar sweetened beverage, because I avoid those. But it's it is a water, but it's like it's a fancy one that the wife buys. But
I got you.
So I think it would be helpful to share a little bit about what we learned from autopsy studies. And things like the NIOSH firefighter fatality investigation series, because we talk a lot about the smoke and the products of combustion and the changing patterns of that and the mixtures that maybe come from even new things like these wildland urban interface. So you have biomass from nature mixing with synthetic things from construction. But on a really the level of pathology, we've done a lot of deep dives on this with Denise Smith, who's probably someone that you've had on here before, who's a physiologist and a great friend and colleague. And we got a database with the help of Chief Ron Sarnicki and the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation that they were having like all these autopsy records kept that were coming from USFA, And we were able to do a very detailed study comparing the hearts and characteristics of firefighters that died from traumatic deaths versus those who had died from sudden cardiac death. And in a nutshell, most of the firefighters, that the vast majority that die of sudden cardiac death, it's due to classic heart disease that you would find in other people. But one thing that was really interesting is that while, let's say, about 3/4 or more had evidence of atherosclerosis of the coronary arteries, a very similar proportion also had enlargement, or what we call an increased cardiomegaly, or an increased heart weight. And most of the firefighters dying of sudden cardiac death, again, like 75 to 80%, they had both of these in concert. So they were what we call, comorbid, like they were together, these two diseases together in the same person. Another thing that was observed is that about 15% had evidence of a clot or a plaque rupture, which is classically what we know now as causes a heart attack or a myocardial infarction. So what that meant to us is that probably by subtraction, most of the deaths were what we would say are electrical in nature, meaning an arrhythmia. So there's some combination of having a certain amount of atherosclerosis, and it's not always a critical level that would, during heavy exercise would cause that person to collapse or, give them a heart attack because there's not enough blood flow. But there's some level of decreased blood flow to the heart, together with the heart working harder, all the stress of what's going on, and the enlargement of the heart that makes people more susceptible to these arrhythmias. So there's something going on there. Having said all that, looking at specific narratives and things, or like even when NIOSH does these like detailed fatality investigations, it's unusual that you can pinpoint an environmental cause that's toxic, meaning like carbon monoxide, a certain type of smoke, cyanide, et cetera. So what we do know is it seems to be an interaction of underlying problems that have developed over decades. And this is where, physicals would come in, and things like stress tests and coronary artery calcium tests and things like that, and looking at the lipids and blood sugar and all blood pressure, all the risk factors. And then the underlying problem being precipitated, an acute event like the sudden cardiac event being precipitated by some sort of emergency duty, often, right? What we did show in other studies, apart from the autopsy ones, but then we've done it like in many situations, we keep coming up with similar numbers. So during fire suppression activities, which might only be like 2% of the professional time spent in a year, you have about 1/3 of all the sudden cardiac deaths. But like, let's say non-emergency duties that might be 80%, it might only be 15%. So it's something like in statistics, if you ever took statistics, there's like observed events versus expected events. If things are just random and there's no relationship to the job, you would expect the number of heart events to be very similar, the proportion of those events occurring in each type of duty to be similar to the amount of time spent in that type of duty. And we did also in law enforcement kind of an analogous analysis of this, which, even though it's a different job, is like a proof of the concept. So let's say for a firefighter, during fire suppression, with all the heavy weight of the turnout gear and the tools and the stress of having this SCBA on and all this stuff, and just going, during alarm response, the heart rates shoot up, as you all know, right, from rest or from sleep, like to near maximal without even doing any exercise. So we found increased risks during alarm response, alarm return, but particularly during fire suppression, where depending upon the model, because no one knows exactly how much time people spent, right? It's all estimates. So you do what's called a sensitivity analysis. So you have like different scenarios, and you say, well, like if it's only 1% of time during the year, then it's like the risk is 100 times non-emergency duties. But if it's 5%, then it's like 10 times. But it's, a tenfold risk is huge. So it's somewhere between like 10 and 100 times elevated over non-emergency duties. And similarly, like in law enforcement, during things that, we could all understand are very stressful, like a pursuit on foot or an altercation with a bad guy, where literally you're thinking, this guy's trying to kill me, I have to survive, right? You have a high adrenaline drive there and rush. The risk during those activities is something like 35 to 70 times the non-emergency duty. So, and we see this in the general population with things like snow shoveling, or excitement of the Super Bowl or World Cup, in Europe and in soccer. People can get, an increased risk of a sudden cardiac event, mainly due to things that are going to increase their heart rate, their blood pressure, and maybe add in all that, adrenaline, which could obviously you putting in stimulatory hormones that can increase the risk of an arrhythmia.
So if I'm understanding,
so it's like, just to summarize, it's like what seems to cause the vast majority of the events is you have an underlying problem, and then the sudden event is precipitated by a job activity.
I'm glad you said that, because that's what I was hearing you say, and I'm understanding is that there's this underlying sort of pre-existing condition that's coupled with the types of high risk, high output, high energy events that we engage in the fire service that kind of come out of nowhere, right? There's no warm up time to stuff like that. Does your research indicate that some of those underlying problems that are exacerbated by the high risk, high energy events, is there a tie or any kind of nexus to our job, whether it's sleep or diet or exposures, those kinds of things, that ties that underlying risk to the industry that potentially, and then I'll ask you a question a little bit later about, hey, what can we do about if those things exist? But has your research shown that our work, our industry has a higher likelihood that we'll have some of those underlying risks?
Yeah, I can't say my personal research, but here's some things we know. We know that obesity is highly prevalent in the fire service. So depending upon whether it's career firefighters, volunteers, and exactly how we measure it, but the prevalence is anywhere between, 1 out of every 3 to 1 out of every 2 members. And when you have obesity, you generally have a clustering of other metabolic risk factors that go along with it. So you have a higher predisposition to issues with lipids, in other words, cholesterol, triglycerides, and things of that sort. You have more insulin resistance and worse glucose tolerance, so more likely to have prediabetes, diabetes. Sleep apnea becomes very prevalent, which increases the risk of hypertension, which also goes with obesity by itself. But of course, you can have hypertension without either of those. But the risk is greatly increased. So that's one. The obesity problem is one factor, and that maybe is probably tied to some of the habits, around the fight. Certainly, shift work decreases sleep, right, and makes sleep more irregular at a minimum, and that's a risk factor. The lack of mandatory exercise, so obviously there are certain members who are always exercising, and they're highly fit, but there are a lot of people that we know that don't exercise, right, or they exercise rarely. And then sometimes those communal meals that are maybe there because you're trying to go for a lower priced or more popular or satisfying product, or you're getting seconds after a run or something like that. And I don't mean a run, a jog. I mean like an emergency dispatch. So there's a lot of comfort foods that are popular that are really those sort of ultra processed, dense in calories, not a lot of fiber, a lot of simple carbohydrates and saturated fats. So there are certainly, let's say cultural, job-related factors that fit theoretically with all of that. But people have not really. Most of what we know comes from the general population. So all the things that you mentioned, like not smoking, exercise, sleeping right, all those things, we know they would help by doing them better or avoiding the things we should avoid. But most of it doesn't come from the fire service. I would say though, with the smoking, and that's one thing that has improved a lot. Probably mainly because of cultural changes in the whole population, and also just regulations. Like a lot of places, it's you're no longer allowed to smoke, right, and be on a fire or police service because of the benefits that accrue to people for heart disease. And but in the course of all these investigations of risk factors and autopsies and types of duty and things like that, one thing that was seen before was like 50% of the sudden cardiac deaths were among people who were smoking, and that was way out of proportion to the overall percentage of people in the fire service who was smoking, which was much, much smaller, maybe 10%, So now that that's going away, that's going to be an improvement. But of course, you have other issues like chewing tobacco, which may not be as toxic to the heart, but could be more toxic in terms of head and neck cancers and things like that. So there's always, you start to work on one problem and other problems, peek their heads up.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you brought up the cultural piece of it, because I was really curious about that, and I thought about the diet stuff, obviously the exercise. We're blessed to have a pretty fit organization here, with the exception of their fire chief, because this is, kind of what I do all day. My fingers are nimble from typing, and I do get up and out of my chair from time to time. But overall, the organization's very fit. But there are some other things, maybe some cultural things that you see in, the tomahawk steaks and the Zins and things like energy drinks and things like that I'm sure do have an impact on our overall cardiac health. Have you seen departments that are shifting some of those cultural elements successfully? And if so, what are they doing? Do you know?
It's a good question. There have been studies done by others where they looked at departments that had the IFF, IFC wellness fitness initiative compared to those who didn't, and they showed some better trends and numbers in those departments that had the initiative. A lot of what I've seen personally is maybe geographic variation. So go to an area like Colorado, and people are really into skiing and hiking and outdoor activities. And it might be quite different than, a northeastern urban area. And there might be differences in certain places, let's say in Florida and California, where people are, going to spend more time outside and on the beach. So I think they're sometimes it's the culture outside of the fire department that, maybe the particular to a certain area. But I'm sure there are departments that do this. I know it was a law enforcement department, not a fire department, but there was a chief who's retired now in a town outside Worcester, which is about 40 minutes from Boston. And they negotiated a policy where they had, fitness standard, not just at entry, but they made everybody do it every year or every 2 years. And they also gave them, 1 hour dedicated in the absence of some public safety, massive public safety emergency. Everybody had like 1 hour of their duty time to be able to exercise in whatever, way they wanted. They want to go to the gym and lift some weights and go to the treadmill, or they wanted to run outside, or, so on and so forth. And, they had a really good track record of avoiding heart problems, where they had several leading up to those policy changes, where the city council kind of came, small place, but they came together and said, hey, why are we having these events, and the people have all these risks, the people who are having them have all these risk factors. But I think it's a process. It's a process.
So leadership does have a role in this, right? I mean, it's not just up to the individual. You're reading my mind, because that was really my next question is that, can leadership make an impact? And so you've seen some policy development that has promoted healthier behaviors or allotted time for things like exercise. Have you seen any other significant leader impacts in your travels? You mentioned the Wellness Fitness Initiative. You mentioned the requirement or the mandate for certain amount of fitness within a 24-hour shift. Have you seen anything else that people are rolling out, even like specifics, like you have to do this much cardio, this much, weight related activities, or specifying the types of activities, or even, I know this is out there. So, and we'll get to the Mediterranean diet stuff here in a minute, I think. But even, sort of coming to prescribe or recommend certain diet elements. Yeah.
So, well, one example I'm familiar with was when Chief LeDuc was at a Broward Sheriff's Office, and they were doing an obesity challenge. I forget the exact name of the program, but they got people together and they were trying to lose weight, as a group, and pushing each other, and it seemed to be quite effective. I think these things are much easier to describe in theory, but in practice it's more difficult. But I would say on the positive side, I think leadership is obviously important, right? Like if the chief is setting an example, and the chiefs under the head chief are doing the same, that's gonna have an important factor. And we don't have enough data on it yet, but one of the younger scientists that was working with me, who's also occupational physician, we set out to develop something called like a occupational health culture score, and there's been one publication on it, and we're trying to get more opportunities, let's say, to study that in detail. But the basic idea of it is that you have a questionnaire and it looks at different aspects of health promotion, and just like there are some standard checklists that may be around safety in workplaces. This one is more oriented towards like do they allow me to take naps? Do they allow us, do you provide fitness equipment? Do you allow us to work out while we're on duty if we're not doing something else? What types of food are you offering? What types of incentives, with your health insurance, policies around smoking, alcohol, different things. So on a very preliminary basis, we see some correlations between a more favorable culture in terms of like prevention and mental health scores. So less symptoms of depression, less symptoms of post-traumatic stress, better sleep quality, things like that. But we need be able to collect more data to really show, in a more definitive way that that's actually making a difference. And then, obviously, if you have enough data, you can kind of drill down and see which individual policies might be most effective, or where you get, the most bang for your buck, so to speak, right? But we don't have that information yet.
No, that's great.
What I was going to tell you is we developed a smartphone app, because one of the issues, looking at all of this and like starting out with autopsies and talking about chronic disease, right, is like, and having, let's say, no better than modest success intervening with people who are already, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. What if we go to recruit academies? So going back 2 steps, like recruit academies usually run, somewhere between 12 and 18 weeks, and they involve a lot of exercise typically. There's less formal teaching and less formal regulation about like what people eat, but they're generally getting in really good shape, and there's been several studies that others did, and we replicated, where you can follow people over the course of the academy from like the beginning to the middle to the end, and their body fat goes down, push-up capacity goes up, time that it takes to run 1.5 miles goes down, and all sorts of other good things happening. We also said what happens when you become a probationary firefighter. And unfortunately, what we found is that within 6 months of leaving the academy, most of the gains that were made during, like the peak fitness at graduation had really just deteriorated a lot. And it wasn't quite all the way back to where it was at the beginning of the academy, but it was, let's say more than halfway there, right? So I mean, I guess that really argues for what we were talking about before, is evidence that the culture may not be that good for your health. So we on the basis of all that as sort of an underlying theory and argument, we convinced FEMA to fund a study to build this smartphone app, which we've tested and have some kind of anecdotal favorable results. But what it really needs is a randomized controlled trial. And one of the things that where we would, if we're able to do that study, hopefully the Homeland Security will get refunded and FEMA will have another call for applications. But if we do that study, one of the things that we really would be keen in looking at is then, not just whether or not we would randomize whole classes of academies to get the app or not get the app, right? Because if you give it to like people at random within a class, they're all going to share what they have and don't have, and so they'll contaminate each other. Whereas if you have a whole class that has it or doesn't have it, you can understand you have kind of a more pristine experiment even though it's a real life environment, right? But then when they graduate from the academy, they're all going to go to different types of departments, and that's where that occupational health culture score would come in. And we could really drill down to see whether in the presence or the absence of having been given this app, which deals with, sleep, nutrition, physical activity, social relations, managing stress, all the different components of a healthy lifestyle, we could see how the effects of the app are modified or not by the occupational health culture. And, so far, to the extent that that's possible, we have shown in just, a non-randomized situation, but there is some correlation between the culture being more positive and having better scores on mental health measures and things like that, which obviously, as mental health and physical health are intimately related. So we'll see. There's hopefully more to come on that.
That's great. And I think this group of our listeners, when it comes time for you to start recruiting organizations to be part of that, you've got a pretty big pool of firefighters and probably some pretty large recruit academies coming through these organizations. So maybe we can circle back whenever it is that funding comes through, that we can get you some good candidates.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that so much. We submitted it last summer, and we had the support of both major national training organizations through the offices of Todd and others at IFC, the support of the chiefs, survival health and safety section, and the union. And we had a very large group of academies around the country. So we had geographic diversity committed to participating, not just ones that had participated in the preliminary studies, which we did mainly in Connecticut and down in Miami-Dade in Florida. But yeah, unfortunately, we didn't make the cut through the fire service review, which was, was always frustrating because you think you're going to get cut in the scientific review, and I think it was really well written, but the fire service members that reviewed it, basically they seemed to look at the satisfaction surveys that were done by the people who used the app. And I thought the results were it's like, are you a glass half full or half empty person, right? So, like any kind of intervention, even if you look at things that are, wildly successful and popular, like the GLP-1 pills and injections, but, after a few months, a lot of people that started on them no longer use it, right? And after a year, maybe the majority of people aren't using it, even though the results might be fairly dramatic, in the short term. So they kind of were skeptical because 100%, like less than 75% of the people said they would use the app again. But there's like no tool that's going to be perfect for everyone. Like you might want to do, I might really like push-ups. You hate push-ups, but there are other exercises. Maybe you love pull-ups and dips, and what I'm saying. Everyone, has things that they like more, they like less. But if 50% of people use something and they want to keep using it, that's like pretty good. But so we have to do a better job, I think, of illustrating how the satisfaction and willingness to continue to engage with our product compares to other sorts of interventions that are out there.
Well, and that's not the only resource that you've developed through your research. I mean, just reading your bio, you've got a book out there that helps us understand how diet can impact it. Tell me a little bit more about some of the tools and resources that you developed through your time to help us also maybe shift the culture either in our own lives or in the firehouse.
Yeah, thank you. The book I think is probably more accessible to people who have a special interest or some kind of background in health and fitness, but it's a textbook of lifestyle medicine that I did with a colleague, and it's kind of oriented towards physicians, dietitians, exercise scientists, people in that realm. But general public could still get something out of it, but it's a little bit dense. When we did, it goes back about 12 years now, we did an intervention study in Indianapolis and Fishers, Indiana fire departments, where we randomized the stations to either a Mediterranean diet intervention or just regular so-called usual care, meaning you didn't do anything. We came up with a lot of let's say resources that are on the website. I think if the school keeps changing, they update their websites and things like that. But if someone Googles survival Mediterranean style, or they just go to our lab, you should be able to still get there. But there's a lot of things, a lot of detail, but there's also some real simple things. Like there's a one pager that has the firefighter Mediterranean diet pyramid. And it also enumerates 5 simple steps you could take to improving your health, like drinking, for example, drinking water instead of sugar sweetened beverages, eating more fruits and vegetables, trying to choose more lean and white proteins over red meats, eating fruits for dessert instead of factory-made sweets, and then it has the different components like the sleep, the socialization, trying to get 150 minutes of moderate exercise or at least 75 of vigorous per week or some combination, so all the different kind of captured in one page. And we've also given it out as a magnet, like a refrigerator magnet, to some of these recruit academies and other groups doing these things. So yeah, there are resources out there, but people have to basically want to apply it.
Yeah, the discipline, boy, because I do love my ice cream. You put an apple in front of me and a bowl of that peanut butter and chocolate ice cream, I'm afraid of what choices I'll make. But well, it's great to have the tools out there, and I think hopefully the app moves forward at some point, because that would be it's fascinating to see, and it's not just this is a topic for a different podcast, but it's not just diet and exercise. There's some cultural elements too that seem to shift once the academy's over, and maybe we can get an app for that too. But I'm going to put you on the spot, right? Your best kind of sales pitch approach here, because if you had the attention and the ear of every fire chief across the country for the next 60 seconds, right? Your commercial timeout or whatever, what are the 2 or 3 most impactful actions that you believe that a fire chief can take to improve the health? And I like the way you talked about the kind of wellness culture of their organization. What are 2 to 3 most impactful steps that I can take to make my organization healthier in the near term?
Yeah, I really think it's setting an example. That people, we can talk all we want, but if you get up there and you're talking about fitness and nutrition and you're pretty healthy,
yep.
I think people believe you more than if you're not. And it's not to say that everyone's not going to look like Tom Brady was on the Fox Business this morning talking. He's among other things he's doing. He's teaming up with a company that's trying to manage the GLP-1 medications for employers, because that's like a big issue where employers generally pay for people's health insurance, and then people, they want to try to find ways to get the medications cheaper, and also make sure that if they're going to give them out, they're going to be more effective, right? So there's like some kind of coaching that goes along with. It's not just like take the injection or take the pill, right? You get on a program,
right? And
they kind of asked him, well, you look great, and everyone knows you're really healthy. Are you using GLP-1s? And he's like, no, but not everybody's born with the amount of discipline and willpower that like he's we all know is someone that follows a very, very maybe could call it maniacal, like extreme, right? Like he's not doing this and he's not doing that, and he only has avocado ice cream, not even real ice cream, once
what I mean? It. It's over. It's over.
yeah. So he already lost you. But I think it's setting an example, and not, also the people that do lifestyle kind of coaching and things. They talk about meeting people where they are, and then trying to get some movement from there. Right? You're not going to make everybody a 5 to 7 time per week gym member, or gym attender. And, you're not going to get everybody to eat carrot sticks and celery sticks and, give up potato chips forever. But, finding some small steps that maybe people could improve, and individualizing the coaching. So I think it's, setting an example, but then giving people maybe flexibility in how to find their improvement, because, there are going to be people who they're never going to be a runner, but there are probably things about, there are things about running that maybe are not so good, for your joints or for people, longer term. But, for some people it works great. But, for other people, walking is good. But someone else wants to swim, bike, it's I think you got to allow, and other people are going to find the activity through things, not going to a gym, but maybe they want to get outside and garden, or do, certain types of, outdoor work and things like that. But I think it's just about getting people to move, getting people to think about this, and, making some small changes on different aspects. I mean, that's kind of like the beauty of the app. It has these 4 different domains of health and wellness, and then each domain has a total of 30 missions. Where you have on each one, there's like 3 levels, and each level has 10 missions. So across the 4 domains, you have 120 missions altogether. And then, you have different resources that you could access to, like the ones we were talking about on the website with the Mediterranean diet and other, pyramids. And there's, there are apps out there that help people do breathing exercises or meditation, or, but think about like relaxation. One person might be into these breathing exercises. Someone else likes yoga. Someone else does meditation. Someone else maybe they have a good friend that they talk to, or they laugh, and that might get them, more relaxed than anything else. So I think it's about having options.
Yeah. So hearing lead from the front, right? So be an example for the culture that you want to see within your organization, and then give that flexibility, give that option, so that the individuals can find the space to do the exercise and the other wellness activities that kind of meet them where they are. That's great. That's great advice. So as a physician, as a researcher, let me ask you, are you optimistic? Are we headed in the right direction on this issue, or are we stagnant, or are we crashing and burning? But are you optimistic about the future of the fire service, and particularly around wellness?
Well, I guess I'm biased because I'm an optimist on everything. I think positive thinking. There is evidence for it that it does make a difference, and so I have to be, but I think in general, science is progressing, both in terms of prevention, in terms of the medications, in terms of the tools, the procedures. If you can avoid accidents and bad things, people are generally living longer. And, I think the evidence is also that the fire service has done a lot. I mean, if you compare it to, say, law enforcement, and I'm not trying to put them down in any way, but there's been much more of an effort, and it's been more collaborative, I think, in terms of the fire service, really striving, to work towards becoming more healthy and advocating for people's health and fitness. And, there seems to be a real interest to do that. So, I think all those, it's kind of impossible that those efforts are all going to be for naught, I think there's been progress.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think hopefully the fact that we're talking about this today and that we're making it a priority to have a conversation, and then you see the collaboration and alignment between the IFC and Metro Chiefs and IAFF and CPSE all identifying health and wellness programming as a critical issue that needs to be top of mind, I think is really good. So, and I love your eternal optimism, because I agree with you that we have to be optimistic. Sometimes gets difficult in this setting. So as we wrap up, I want to extend a sincere thank you to you, Dr. Kales, for sharing this time and your expertise with us, and especially for navigating this topic that is or should be top of mind for every fire chief and every firefighter across the country. Also want to say a big thank you to LifeScan Wellness, our presenting sponsor, for supporting this conversation and for their commitment to early detection, prevention, and whole person health in the fire service. For our listeners, the fight against occupational and lifestyle issues that are impacting the health and longevity of our members is ongoing, but it is one that we can impact if we know about it and if we make an effort to do so through smarter practices, stronger advocacy, better research, and a culture that values long, healthy careers. We can change the trajectory for the next generation of firefighters. So that's it for today's episode of the Metropolitan Fire Chiefs Leadership Development Podcast. And thank you if you made it with us this long. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This series, again, is created by Metro Chiefs for Metro Chiefs, but the lessons we talk about here apply to leaders at every level across departments of all sizes here in the U.S. and around the world. Just ask you, if you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with your colleagues. If you have ideas for topics that we should cover, please send us an email, and we will do our best to get after it. So in the meantime, keep crushing it out there, and please continue to live out the Metro vision of being a place to belong, inspiring success. Take care of yourselves.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.